Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Dennis and here is my assistant Bob, who will be helping us with really tough questions. What types of interviews are there in sociolinguistic research? In this video, we'll focus on interviews as an important methodological tool in qualitative data collection. Let's go! Research methods are generally divided into quantitative and qualitative. In this video, we'll discuss the latter, namely qualitative methods. So what are qualitative methods? It's basically an in-depth investigation, something you want to explore thoroughly. The major feature of qualitative research is that it's naturalistic, preferring to study people, things or events in their natural settings. As a rule, qualitative research is conducted through an intense or prolonged contact with the field or a life situation. So the main task of the researcher is to explicate ways people in particular settings come to understand, account for, take action, and otherwise manage their day-to-day situations. To collect data, we often travel to a different place to find people to interview or to find a community of people to conduct our interviews. And this is called fieldwork. But before traveling anywhere, the first step is to come up with a detailed research plan. So first we've got a statement of the research problem. So it's basically what we're trying to find out. Second, we've got research questions. They basically help us guide our research and select the right research instruments. For example, interviews or questionnaires, or adopt a mixed method approach where we combine different methods of data collection. Literature review is an important part of the research plan, which we can divide roughly into the theoretical and empirical research literature. The former is needed to familiarize ourselves with the major theoretical considerations in the field. The latter will help us look at what has already been done in our field, for example, similar research. In other words, your study should aim to address the various gaps and inconsistencies in the evidence that you find in the literature. A justification for the choice of methods and a description of data collection, how these data will be collected, who your informants will be, how many informants there will be, how they will be recruited, and since we are working with people, this means we'll have to take into account ethical considerations. These are highly important aspects of any social research. I'll talk about these towards the end of this video, so stay tuned. Then we look at how our data will be analyzed and interpreted. And finally, the ways in which these outcomes will be disseminated. So preparing for a fieldwork is a highly responsible task because you enter the inner world of other people. So with the help of interviews, we can explore a number of aspects of people's feelings, emotions, perceptions, meanings, habits, experiences, attitudes, definitions of situations, and thus gain insights into how people construct reality. For this reason, interviews are seen as a central data collection method in qualitative research. Interviewing in sociolinguistics has a wide variety of forms, and it's not the interview that you normally see on TV. In sociolinguistics and in social sciences in general, it's a specific form of conversation where knowledge is produced through the interaction between an interviewer and interviewee. The most common type of interview is individual interviews, face-to-face verbal interchange. But it can also take face-to-face group interviewing or interview through a phone, and more recently using online means of communication. An interview can be a one-time brief exchange, for example over Zoom, or it can take place over multiple lengthy sessions, sometimes spanning days and weeks, as in live history interviewing. And we normally divide interviews into three types: structured, semi-structured, and unstructured. At this point, it should be stressed that each type is selected according to the scope of research. Likewise, each type has its strengths and weaknesses. The first type of interview is the structured interview. The interview is structured and standardized. This means that the interview questions are standardized. We've got pre-coded categories used for responses, and the responses can be quantifiable. For example, we can find out how many people said yes and how many people answered no to a given question. For example, did you see the Spider-Man No Way Home movie? The answer is either yes or no. And then we can count how many people said yes, how many people said no. And we call these dichotomous questions, where the answer is either this or that. The second feature of structured interviews is that the questions must be accurately worded. In other words, there shouldn't be any ambiguity. Then we've got multiple choice questions, and answers to these questions must be mutually exclusive. That is, you select only one answer, meaning that if one answer is selected, the other answers automatically get excluded. For example, the question of age. And of course, we don't want to embarrass our interviewees with questions like how old are you? For this reason, we create age groups. For example, what age group do you belong to? 20 to 29, 30 to 39, 40 to 49, 50, and it goes. For example, if you are 25 years old, you would just go for the first age group, and automatically the other age groups are excluded. In structured interviews, we also use the Likert scale questions. This is a response scale in which respondents specify the level of agreement to a statement, typically in 5 points. For example, 1. Strongly disagree. 2. Disagree. 3. Neither agree nor disagree. 4. Agree. And 5. Strongly agree. You ask your interviewee to agree with a statement. For example, I am a TikTok addict. Give your answer according to the scale, where 1 is strongly disagree and 5 strongly agree. I would rate myself 4. What about you? So what are the advantages and disadvantages of structured interviews? Let's start with disadvantages. First, it's very difficult to get insight into a problem. That is people's inner thoughts, their beliefs, their attitudes. What you get is only yes/no answer, or you've got a statement agreement or disagreement, and there is basically no explanation why the respondent answered the way he or she answered. But what are the advantages? First, it's quick, it's short, and in relatively short period of time, you can gain a lot of rich data that can be quantified, and you can actually statistically analyze that. The second type of interview is semi-structured interviews, and that's the most frequently used one in sociolinguistic research. It's basically a combination of structured and more open-ended questions that try to elicit people's ideas, people's beliefs, their attitudes, their opinions on different aspects. And in general, the semi-structured interview can generate a discussion that could be relevant to your research scope. For example, you may ask questions like, why do you think our planet is not flat? Or why do you use language X and not language Y when you talk to Bob, for example? And that's the main strength of this type of interview, because you go beyond the standard questions and you can ask for specification or ask people to elaborate on what they mentioned. And basically this way you gain insights into what people think and what they believe on a particular aspect. The disadvantage, however, is that it's not always easy to find people to interview. It's not easy to recruit people for... These are more lengthy interviews. in comparison to structured interviews. So it takes more time. On average, it could go from 15 to 1 hour, or even more than 1 hour. But of course, there are various techniques that allow us to find people, to recruit them. For example, you've got the snowball technique, or you've got the friend of a friend technique. And finally, the third type is unstructured interviews. This type of interview consists of open-ended questions, not standardized, and there are different general questions to keep the interview going. For example, if you're interested in identifying different linguistic features, you would like your participant to talk extensively. So you may raise up different topics and you will try to identify different, syntactic, phonetic, morphological variation or stylistic variation, etc. Likewise, this type of interview can give the opportunity to explain the answer in detail. Examples of open-ended questions. Tell me about your relationship with your boyfriend or your girlfriend. What does success mean to you? Or, for example, you can read a quote and ask your interviewee to provide a comment, what he or she thinks on that. The disadvantage of this type of interview is that it's lengthy, it takes a lot of time, and of course with that comes a lot of data which you need to transcribe, you need to spend hours listening to your recordings and try to pick up the relevant points that you need to study. So of course these type of interview can give you an insight to what people think. This will basically help you understand a particular problem or trace different patterns of how people use language, how different linguistic features are used in different situations. And that could be indicative of people's gender identity, their social class, their ethnic identity, and so on. In all types of interviews, please be careful that the wording for your questions must not be offensive, must not be irritating to your interviewees. Participants must not be ambiguous, must not be too intellectual. You want to keep it simple so that your informant will understand the question properly. The questions must not be too long because, again, you may get lost in what you're trying to ask. It's possible that your respondents will, again, lose the track and won't understand the question. And very important, your questions must not lead or point in any way to answers. You want their opinion to a particular problem, not yours. Finally, let's talk about ethical considerations. As I mentioned, since we're dealing with people, we have to take into account ethics. So in order for your study to be ethical, you need to take a consent from the people that you're interviewing, a consent to participate in an interview. Under no circumstances can you conduct surreptitious recordings. This is totally illegal in academia and it's severely punished. All your interviewees must be informed that you are going to interview them and record them. Likewise, as a researcher, you must guarantee confidentiality and anonymity. So no one should be able to find those participants based on the data that you present to public. I normally use pseudonyms to identify my informants, and pseudonyms usually reflect people's identities. For example, if they are Greeks, if the real name is, say, Kostas, I would use a pseudonym Yorgos. That would reflect the ethnic allegiance. Or if your informant is Russian, for example, and the real name is Ivan, I may use Stanislav, okay? So that would reflect the identity of a person. And also, another important fact is that if your participant at one point decides not to participate in an interview, you should respect his or her decision not to participate. I hope you found this information useful, and I wish you productive research and interesting data collection. That's all for now. Thanks for watching and see you next time.